A murder at 40,000 feet. No weapon, no escape. Only one detective, with the little gray cells sharp enough to solve the impossible. Welcome to Baker Street Riddles, and thank you for being here. Your support is what keeps these mysteries alive. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Settle in with your tea or coffee, find a comfortable seat and prepare to join Captain Hastings and the remarkable Hercule Poirot as they unravel a murder committed in the most confined of circumstances. Hercule Poirot and the Murder at 40,000 Feet. Chapter 1. Taking Flight. I have accompanied my friend Hercule Poirot on many remarkable journeys over the years, but none quite so extraordinary as our transatlantic crossing aboard the new Stratolina aircraft in the spring of 1939. The magnificent flying machine with its pressurized cabin allowing flight above the weather represented the very pinnacle of modern aviation. Poirot's gloved fingers drummed a precise rhythm on his armrest as we taxied down the runway. His mustache twitched slightly, a sure sign of his unease. "Calm yourself, old chap," I said. "These machines are perfectly safe. It is not a question of safety, mon ami." Poirot adjusted his bow tie with meticulous precision. "It is a question of dignity. Man was not meant to be hurled through the air in such an undignified manner." The engines roared louder. Poirot closed his eyes and gripped the armrests as the aircraft gathered speed, his knuckles widening beneath his immaculate gloves. Only when we had leveled off at our cruising altitude did he exhale slowly and open his eyes. "You see?" I gestured toward the window. Smooth as silk. Beyond the oval glass, cotton-white clouds stretched beneath us like a vast carpet, occasionally parting to reveal glimpses of the Atlantic's dark blue expanse. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow across the cabin's polished wood and brushed aluminum interior. Indeed, Poirot dabbed his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, though I would have preferred Sir William's business to have been conducted via telegram. Sir William Radford, chairman of Imperial Airways, had personally requested Poirot's presence in New York, regarding what his letter had described as a matter of international delicacy. The nature of this delicacy remained unspecified, but the accompanying first-class tickets had proved persuasive. A steward in a crisp uniform approached our seats, pushing a gleaming drink cart ahead of him. "Refreshments, gentlemen? Syrup de cassis, if you please," Poirot requested. "Just soda water for me," I added. As the steward prepared our drinks, I took the opportunity to observe our fellow passengers. The first-class cabin housed only 8 other travelers, each separated by enough space to ensure privacy, a luxury reflected in the astronomical price of the tickets. Across the aisle, a broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair examined documents spread across his fold-down table. A gold signet ring flashed on his finger as he made notations with a fountain pen. Behind him, a younger man with wire-rimmed spectacles peered anxiously over his shoulder, until the older man, without looking up, said something that caused his companion to retreat. "Victor Carrington," Poirot murmured, following my gaze. "The American industrialist. His factories produced much of the steel for this very aircraft, or so I understand. You know him? Of him only. His reputation precedes him." Poirot accepted his drink with a nod of thanks. A man who has made many fortunes, and perhaps as many enemies. 2 rows ahead, a striking young woman with copper-colored hair, arranged in the latest style, adjusted a compact mirror. Her slender fingers adorned with an emerald that caught the light, with blinding brilliance, tilted the mirror such that it offered a view not of her own reflection, but of Carrington behind her. Upon noticing my observation, she snapped the compact shut and turned to the older woman beside her, who wore a hat adorned with feathers that quivered with the aircraft's every subtle movement. "Lady Westholme and her daughter," I ventured. Poirot shook his head. "Lady Westholme, yes. The young woman is Mrs. Carrington, Victor's wife. You note the age difference? Most significant." A distinguished gentleman in tweeds occupied the seat ahead of us, gray hair framing a face weathered by exposure to the elements. A leather satchel, stuffed with papers, protruded from beneath his seat. He consulted his pocket watch with a frown, before flagging down a passing steward with questions about their arrival time. "Professor Ambrose Finch?" Poirot supplied, without my asking. "A most distinguished archaeologist returning from an expedition in Egypt. His discoveries at the tomb of Amenhotep caused quite the sensation in academic circles. Farther up the cabin, a woman whose face seemed vaguely familiar adjusted a silk scarf around her elegant neck. Her movements possessed a theatrical quality, each gesture practiced and precise. "Is that?" I began. "Miss Diana Levison," Poirot confirmed. "The actress. Hercule at the Old Vic was much praised, though I myself did not have the pleasure of witnessing it. The final passenger in our exclusive compartment was a thin, scholarly-looking man with a doctor's bag secured beside him. He leafed through a medical journal, occasionally making annotations in the margins with quick, decisive strokes. "Dr. Gregory Winters," Poirot said, completing my education of our traveling companions. "A surgeon of some renown traveling to address a conference in New York on the latest advances in surgical techniques." I raised an eyebrow. "You seem remarkably well informed about our fellow passengers, Poirot." He tapped the side of his egg-shaped head. "The little gray cells, Hastings. They work even when we are suspended miles above the earth. I requested the passenger manifest before boarding. It is always wise to know with whom one travels, n'est-ce pas?" The aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence, causing the drinks on our trays to slosh dangerously. Mrs. Carrington's hand flew to her throat, her knuckles whitening around a pendant that hung there. Professor Finch's papers scattered across the floor, prompting a muttered curse as he stooped to collect them. The turbulence passed as quickly as it had come. Victor Carrington glanced at his watch, then rose from his seat and made his way toward the rear of the cabin where the lavatories were located. As he passed our row, his sleeve brushed against Poirot's shoulder. He did not apologize or acknowledge the contact. Poirot's eyes narrowed, following Carrington's retreating figure. He leaned slightly toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Observe, Hastings, in this metal tube suspended above the Atlantic, we are all at the mercy of the elements, and perhaps of each other. How a most interesting collection of individuals, would you not agree?" I nodded, sipping my soda water, unaware that within hours this unremarkable observation would prove to be a chilling premonition of the events to come. Chapter 2. Suspicious Circumstances. Our first 2 hours in the air passed without incident. The Stratoliner's engines maintained their steady drone as we cruised above a magnificent carpet of clouds. I had been engrossed in a mystery novel, rather a good one, though Poirot had sniffed disapprovingly at my choice of reading material when the aircraft suddenly lurched. My book tumbled to the floor as the fastened seatbelt sign illuminated with a sharp ping. Poirot, who had been dozing, opened his eyes with a start. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice over the speaker system, slightly distorted by static. "We are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your safety belts." Cabin crew, secure the cabin." The stewards moved quickly through the aisle, checking that tables were folded and belongings secured. One of them stumbled as the aircraft dipped again, catching himself on the back of Professor Finch's seat. The professor's papers scattered once more, drawing a muttered exclamation that sounded distinctly unprofessorial. "Most disagreeable," Poirot murmured, his fingers tightening around his armrests. His face had taken on a distinct greenish tinge. Across the aisle, Mrs. Carrington pressed a handkerchief to her lips, her emerald ring glittering as her hand trembled. Behind her, Diana Levison appeared remarkably composed, applying a fresh coat of crimson lipstick, despite the aircraft's juddering motion. The turbulence intensified. The plane dropped suddenly, producing a chorus of gasps. A water glass from the drink cart sailed through the air, shattering against a window with a crash that caused Lady Westholme to emit a strangled cry. For nearly 20 minutes, we were tossed about like a child's toy in a bathtub. I must confess that even my naval experience did not entirely insulate me from a growing queasiness. Poirot had closed his eyes again, his lips moving in what I suspected was silent prayer. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the turbulence ceased. The aircraft leveled out, and a collective sigh of relief rippled through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, "we have cleared the area of disturbance. You may unfasten your seat belts, but please remain near your seats, as we may encounter further turbulence." Poirot dabbed his forehead with his handkerchief. "The indignities one suffers in the name of modern convenience, Hastings." I bent to retrieve my fallen book, and noticed Maxwell Reed, Carrington's business associate, making his way forward along the aisle, pausing momentarily beside Carrington's seat. Their exchange was brief, Reed's expression tightening before he continued toward the lavatory. The chief steward, Andrews, according to his name badge, approached with a fresh drink cart, methodically working his way from the front of the cabin. When he reached Carrington, he leaned down to take the industrialist's order. A frown crossed Andrews' face. He touched Carrington's shoulder, then bent closer. Something in his posture captured Poirot's attention. "Pardon me, sir, Mr. Carrington." Andrews' voice carried an unusual note. He straightened abruptly and looked around the cabin, meeting Poirot's gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Poirot rose swiftly and approached Carrington's seat, myself following close behind. Victor Carrington sat motionless, his head tilted slightly toward the window as though admiring the view. Only when one stood directly before him did the awful truth become apparent. His eyes stared unseeing at the horizon, his skin already taking on a waxy pallor. A dark stain, small but unmistakable, marred the front of his immaculate suit jacket, just over his heart. "He's—" Andrews stuttered. "Dead," Poirot confirmed quietly. "Please, fetch the captain immediately." As Andrews hurried toward the cockpit, Poirot's gloved fingers lightly touched Carrington's wrist, confirming what we already knew. His eyes narrowed as he examined the wound, careful not to disturb anything. "What is it? What's happening?" Mrs. Carrington half rose from her seat, craning her neck to see past the other passengers who had begun to notice the commotion. "Please, remain seated, madame," Poirot instructed firmly. Dr. Winters was already moving toward us, medical bag in hand. "Let me through, please." Professor Finch peered over his spectacles, his weathered face registering alarm. Lady Westholme clutched her daughter's arm, whispering urgently. Diana Levison watched the scene with wide eyes, one hand pressed against her scarf-covered throat. The captain arrived, his face grave beneath his cap. After a brief examination and whispered consultation with Poirot and Dr. Winters, he addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we have experienced an incident. Mr. Carrington appears to have been," he hesitated, "fatally injured. We will divert to the nearest suitable airport." A fresh wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. Mrs. Carrington's face drained of color. Maxwell Reed, who had returned from the lavatory, stood frozen in the aisle. The captain conferred briefly with the navigator who had accompanied him, then turned back to the passengers. "I have been informed that due to our current position, fuel considerations, and weather conditions along the coast, we cannot safely land for at least 5 hours. We will maintain our present altitude and speed while the situation is assessed." He turned to Poirot. "Mr. Poirot, given your reputation, would you be willing to—" "But of course, Captain," Poirot interjected smoothly. "Poirot is at your service." Dr. Winters completed his preliminary examination, speaking quietly to Poirot. "The wound is peculiar, a precise puncture, narrow but deep, very little external bleeding. Death would have been almost instantaneous." "The weapon?" Poirot inquired. "Not present," the doctor confirmed. "Something thin and rigid, with considerable strength behind it. And the time of death? Difficult to be precise at this altitude, but I would estimate within the last 30 minutes, during the turbulence most likely." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Hastings, if you would be so good as to take notes, we must speak with each passenger individually." As the captain arranged for Carrington's body to be moved to a partitioned area at the rear of the cabin, Poirot addressed the stunned passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, a tragedy has occurred. Until we land, this aircraft is in effect sealed. No one may enter, no one may leave. While the proper authorities await our arrival, I shall, with the captain's permission, make preliminary inquiries." He paused, his eyes moving deliberately over each face. "During the period of turbulence, every one of us was instructed to remain seated with belts fastened. Yet, in that brief window of confusion and distraction, someone managed to commit murder. The facts suggest that the culprit must be among us in this cabin." Lady Westholme gave a small strangled cry. Maxwell Reed's jaw tightened visibly. Diana Levison's fingers crushed her handkerchief into a ball. As I prepared my notebook, Poirot delicately slipped his hand into Carrington's jacket pocket and withdrew a small folded piece of paper. He glanced at it briefly, his expression revealing nothing, as he tucked it into his own pocket. Outside the windows, the endless blue sky stretched in all directions, beautiful, empty, and offering no escape for either victim or killer. Chapter 3. The Little Gray Cells. The captain arranged for the rear section of the first-class cabin to be cordoned off with the heavy curtains normally used during overnight flights. This makeshift interview room, cramped though it was, would serve as Poirot's headquarters until we landed. Carrington's body had been respectfully covered and secured in the aircraft's small cargo hold, accessible only through a door behind the galley. Poirot arranged 2 chairs facing each other, then meticulously aligned a third at a precise angle beside one of them. He gestured for me to take this third seat. "Notes, Hastings," he reminded me, tapping his temple. "Most important. The human memory, it is fallible. The written word remains." I nodded, pen poised over my notebook. Andrews, the chief steward, stood nearby awaiting instructions. "The seating chart, if you please," Poirot requested. Andrews provided a diagram of the cabin which Poirot studied with narrowed eyes, and the passenger manifest with all names. "Here, sir." Andrews handed over a typewritten list. "The captain has asked me to assist you in any way possible." "Bien. First, I should like to speak with Mrs. Carrington." Andrews slipped through the curtain. Moments later, he ushered in Elaine Carrington, her copper hair slightly disheveled. Her composure remained intact. Only the whitened knuckles of her clasped hands betrayed her inner turmoil. "Madame, please be seated." Poirot indicated the chair opposite him. "May I offer my condolences on your loss?" She inclined her head slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Poirot. This is, quite unbelievable. Indeed, if you would permit me a few questions. Your husband, he had enemies." Her laugh held no humor. Victor had a talent for making enemies. It came with his particular brand of success. "Would you care to elaborate, madame?" Her fingers absently twisted the emerald ring. Victor's believed business was war. He took no prisoners. Those steel mills the papers praise him for. Built on the ruins of his competitors. His shipping concerns, acquired through what some might call ruthless tactics. And yet you married him. A fleeting smile touched her lips. "I was 22, Mr. Poirot. Victor was established, successful, persuasive. The age difference did not trouble you. Should it have?" Her gaze was steady. Poirot changed tack. "During the turbulence, you remained in your seat?" "As instructed, I'm not fond of flying in the best conditions." During turbulence, she shuddered delicately. "I wouldn't have moved for the world. Did you observe anyone who did move, madame?" She hesitated. "I had my eyes closed for most of it. The motion makes me ill." "And your husband, when did you last speak with him?" "Shortly after the meal service. He mentioned a business matter he needed to review." Her voice remained level, controlled. "Mr. Poirot, who would do this? Who could do this with all of us present? That, madame, is what we shall discover." Poirot rose slightly, signaling the interview's end. "One final question. Did your husband carry any significant documents on this journey?" Something flickered behind her eyes. Victor always carried important papers. His briefcase should be with his belongings. After she departed, Poirot sat silently for several moments, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Well, Hastings, your impressions?" I tapped my pen against my notebook. "Rather composed for a newly made widow, wouldn't you say?" "Indeed, but shock affects people differently. We must reserve judgment." Professor Finch followed next, his weathered face betraying irritation at the interruption to his journey. "I fail to see how I can assist," he began, settling his lanky frame into the chair. "I was working on my monograph throughout the journey, even during the turbulence, Professor, especially then. Focusing on my work helps me ignore unpleasantness." He removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief. "I've spent decades on excavations in remote locations. A bit of rough air is hardly noteworthy. You are acquainted with Mr. Carrington." Finch's hand paused mid-polish. "We've crossed paths. He donated to several archaeological foundations. Our relationship was purely professional." "Not entirely cordial, perhaps?" Poirot suggested mildly. Finch replaced his spectacles with deliberate precision. Mr. Carrington had recently withdrawn funding from a particularly promising dig in the Valley of the Kings. No explanation offered. Hundreds of man-hours and potentially significant discoveries abandoned. A substantial grievance. An academic frustration, Mr. Poirot. Hardly motive for murder. Finch's tone chilled perceptibly. "Besides, I was in my seat throughout. Anyone would confirm it." Next came Maxwell Reed, Carrington's business partner. The man's complexion had a grayish cast, his movements tense as he sat down. "A terrible business," he began before Poirot could speak. "Simply terrible. Victor and I had our differences, but this—" He broke off, passing a hand across his face. "These differences, Mr. Reed, of what nature were they?" Reed's shoulders stiffened. "Standard business disagreements, nothing unusual for partners. Yet you were observed, having what appeared to be a heated exchange with Mr. Carrington before takeoff." Reed's eyes widened momentarily. "We were discussing the Wheeler merger. Victor wanted to proceed aggressively. I counseled caution, hardly unusual. And during the turbulence, strapped in my seat like everyone else, I value my neck too much to wander about during such conditions." He leaned forward. "Look, I had no reason to harm Victor. Our partnership was profitable. Without him—" His voice trailed off meaningfully. Diana Levison's entrance brought a subtle change to the atmosphere of our makeshift interview room. The actress moved with practiced grace, arranging herself in the chair with the precision of one accustomed to being observed. "Mr. Poirot?" She inclined her head. "Captain Hastings? Miss Levison, you were acquainted with the deceased." "Victor?" Her painted lips curved slightly. "Yes, we knew each other some years ago, before his marriage." "A romantic association?" Poirot inquired delicately. She adjusted her silk scarf. "Briefly, Victor was persistent when he wanted something, or someone." The scarf slipped slightly, revealing a thin silver chain at her neck. "But that was long ago. We've maintained cordial relations since. You did not speak with him during this flight." "Only in passing. I congratulated him on his recent acquisition of transatlantic airways." Her eyes met Poirot's directly. "I was in my seat during the turbulence, Mr. Poirot. I'm sure the stewards will confirm it." As our interviews continued, Lord Westholme reluctantly admitted to significant investments in Carrington's ventures, while De Winters revealed he had once testified against Carrington in a lawsuit brought by injured factory workers. Each passenger provided alibis that seemed unassailable, yet each harbored connections to the victim that might constitute motive. Between interviews, Poirot slipped out to examine the galley area and the drink cart that had been in use at the time of the murder. His attention to these seemingly mundane items drew curious glances from the flight crew, but he offered no explanation for his interest. When we had a moment alone, I consulted my notes. Everyone claims to have remained seated, yet someone clearly did not. Poirot nodded, extracting the folded paper he had removed from Carrington's pocket. He smoothed it carefully between his fingers. "What does it say?" I asked. "Remember, Icarus," he read. "Most interesting, is it not? The mythological figure who flew too close to the sun." His eyes drifted toward the window, where the afternoon sun blazed across the vast emptiness surrounding our aircraft. In that moment, suspended between heaven and earth, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cabin's temperature. Chapter 4. Secrets at Altitude. While Poirot continued his methodical interviews, I took the opportunity to observe our fellow passengers from a discreet position near the galley. Tension had transformed the luxurious cabin into a pressure vessel of suspicion. Mrs. Carrington sat with her face turned toward the window, the sunlight catching the copper highlights in her hair. Lady Westholme leaned across the aisle to whisper something to her, but Mrs. Carrington merely shook her head, her posture rigidly upright. Maxwell Reed paced the narrow confines of the cabin, 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, his hands clasped behind his back. Each time he passed Diana Levison's seat, his step faltered almost imperceptibly. Andrews approached me with a silver coffee pot. "Coffee, sir?" "Thank you, yes." As he poured, I asked casually, "Did you notice anything unusual before or during the turbulence?" The steward's hand remained steady. but a muscle twitched at the corner of his jaw. Only that Miss Levison visited the lavatory shortly before we hit the rough air. She was just returning to her seat when the captain illuminated the seatbelt sign. I made a mental note of this detail, which contradicted her assertion of remaining seated throughout. And the drink cart? Was it in service during the turbulence? No, sir. We had just begun service when the turbulence hit. Protocol requires us to secure the cart immediately. His eyes darted toward the galley, though in the confusion it wasn't properly locked down, rolled a bit. It did. Poirot emerged from behind the makeshift curtain, Professor Finch following with a sour expression. My friend beckoned to me with a subtle gesture. Come, Hastings, we must examine the victim's effects. A steward had placed Carrington's briefcase and personal items on a fold-down table in our interview area. Poirot snapped open the leather briefcase with gloved hands, methodically spreading its contents before us. Observe, Hastings, he murmured. What do you see? The briefcase contained several file folders filled with contracts and financial statements, a leather-bound appointment book, and a smaller notebook with a black cover. Business documents, I offered. Nothing unusual for a man of his position. Précisément. And yet Poirot lifted the small notebook, carefully turning its pages. Most interesting. I leaned closer. The notebook contained a series of entries in Carrington's bold handwriting. Most appeared to be standard business notations, but several pages contained cryptic references. Operation Icarus, Phase 2, MR wavering, apply pressure, WF connection, secured AF situation, neutralized. Below these entries, a list of initials with numbers beside them. The final page bore yesterday's date with a single notation. 40,000 feet. Perfect conditions. Initials, I murmured. Monsieur could be Maxwell Reed. And AF, Professor Ambrose Finch, perhaps? Poirot suggested. The little gray cells. They are beginning to arrange the pieces. A knock at the curtain interrupted us. Dr. Winters stood there, his thin face grave. Mr. Poirot, I've been considering the wound. It's most unusual. A single puncture, narrow but deep, directly to the heart. The weapon would need to be extraordinary, thin enough to create a minimal entry wound, yet rigid enough to penetrate a tailored suit, shirt, and sternum with sufficient force. Poirot nodded. A stiletto, perhaps. Possibly, but I've examined everyone's belongings as requested. Nothing of the sort was found. The doctor hesitated. There's something else. The wound edges were unusual, almost as if, Poirot prompted, as if the weapon itself had changed shape after penetration. The doctor shook his head. Medically impossible, of course. After the doctor departed, Poirot requested Andrews bring him the passenger manifests for the entire aircraft, including those in the economy cabin behind us. He studied these intently before slipping them into his pocket. We must speak with the chief steward again, Poirot announced. There is a matter concerning the galley I wish to clarify. As we made our way forward, Diana Levison emerged from the lavatory, her eyes widening slightly at our sudden appearance. Her hand flew to her scarf, adjusting it with practiced grace. Mr. Poirot, she acknowledged coolly. Miss Levison. Poirot's eyes noted every detail of her appearance. I understand you visited the lavatory shortly before the turbulence began, not during the entire event, as you had indicated earlier. A flash of something, annoyance, alarm, crossed her face before her features composed themselves. Did I say that? How careless of me. Yes, I did visit the lavatory briefly. My compact had fallen from my handbag, and I wished to repair my appearance. I see. And did you observe anything unusual during this brief excursion? Nothing at all. Her fingers toyed with the silver chain at her neck. "If you'll excuse me." In the galley, Andrews showed us the service arrangements, including the drink cart that had been in use at the time of the murder. Poirot examined it with meticulous care, opening each drawer and compartment. "The ice pick, Andrews?" Poirot inquired. "For the ice service, where is it kept?" Andrews blinked. "Ice pick, sir? We don't carry such implements, safety regulations. The ice is pre-cut in the commissary before loading." "Indeed," Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Yet you have a freezer compartment in the galley." "Yes, sir, for chilling champagne and storing perishables for the meal service." Poirot bent to examine the compartment in question, then straightened with a satisfied nod. He moved to the waste bins, sifting carefully through discarded napkins, cups, and food containers. "Hastings," he murmured, "do you recall the drink service that was interrupted by the turbulence?" "Coffee and liqueurs," I confirmed. The cart had just reached Carrington's Row, and what beverages were being served? I frowned, trying to remember. "Coffee, certainly, and I believe I saw brandy, whiskey, perhaps some cordials." "Precisely. And how were these served?" "In glasses with ice, for those who requested it." "With ice," Poirot repeated softly. "Most significant." As we returned to the main cabin, the aircraft entered another patch of turbulence, though milder than before. The passengers clutched their armrests, with the dual anxiety of the rough air and the knowledge that a killer moved among them. Professor Finch caught Poirot's arm as we passed. "I've been thinking about that note. Remember Icarus?" In the myth, Icarus ignored warnings and flew too close to the sun. His wings, held together by wax, melted. His fall was the direct result of his hubris. "A most apposite observation, Professor." Poirot inclined his head. "Tell me, in your archaeological work, have you encountered weapons made of unusual materials? Materials that might change their form after use?" Finch's bushy eyebrows rose. "An interesting question. Ancient cultures fashioned weapons from many substances: stone, bone, wood." He paused. "There are accounts from northern expeditions of hunters using ice spears, frozen water sharpened to a lethal point, the perfect disposable weapon, melting away and leaving no trace." "Fascinating," Poirot murmured. "Most illuminating." Back at our seats, I reviewed my notes, while Poirot gazed thoughtfully out the window. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long golden rays through the cabin. The light caught a discarded drink stirrer in the aisle, its crystal surface refracting tiny rainbows across the carpet. Poirot followed my gaze, then suddenly bent to retrieve it, turning it over in his gloved fingers. Something in his expression changed, the slight widening of the eyes, the almost imperceptible nod that I had come to recognize as the moment when a critical piece of the puzzle fell into place. He slipped the stirrer into his pocket and withdrew a handkerchief. Carefully, he collected several drops of water from different locations, the condensation on a window, a drop from the galley sink, and moisture from the outside of a water glass. With each sample, he created a small damp circle on the handkerchief, marking each with his pen. When I raised an inquiring eyebrow, he merely tapped the side of his egg-shaped head. 5 hours had never seemed so long, nor the confined space of the aircraft cabin so fraught with hidden dangers. Chapter 5. The plot thickens. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker system, explaining that we were approaching the coordinates for a potential emergency landing at a small airfield in eastern Canada. A ripple of relief passed through the cabin. Poirot, however, appeared vexed by this development. "We require more time, Mastings," he murmured, tucking his handkerchief of water samples carefully into his breast pocket. "The solution is forming, but it is not yet complete." He rose abruptly and made his way to the cockpit. I remained in my seat, observing the passengers. Mrs. Carrington dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, the first visible sign of grief she had displayed since her husband's death. Beside her, Lady Westholme patted her arm with the perfunctory comfort of the English aristocracy. Professor Finch had resumed his work, though his eyes frequently darted to the other passengers over the rims of his spectacles. Dr. Winters appeared to be dozing, but the tension in his jaw belied any genuine rest. Most intriguing was the behavior of Maxwell Reed and Diana Levison. Reed had taken a seat at the rear of the cabin, and Miss Levison, after a moment's hesitation, joined him. Their conversation appeared intense, her head bent close to his fingers nervously toying with his watch chain. When she placed her hand briefly on his arm, he shook it off with a sharp gesture that spoke volumes. Poirot returned, his expression unreadable. "There has been a change of plans. The Canadian airfield reports poor visibility due to sudden fog. We continue to New York." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fate, it seems, has granted us the time we require." He gestured for me to follow him to the galley, where he opened the freezer compartment once more. This time he removed a tray of ice cubes, examining each with his pocket magnifying glass. "What exactly are you looking for?" I inquired. "Evidence of tampering, mon ami." "Ah!" He pointed to faint scratches on the interior surface. "Someone has used this compartment for purposes beyond the chilling of champagne." Andrews appeared with fresh coffee. "The captain asked me to inform you that we are continuing to New York, Mr. Poirot. We should land in approximately 3.5 hours. "Excellent. Tell me, Andrews, the drink cart? It has been restocked since the, incident?" "Yes, sir. A standard procedure. We cleaned it thoroughly and prepared it for the pre-landing service. I should like to examine its contents," Poirot requested. Andrews led us to where the cart stood ready, its silver surface gleaming under the cabin lights. Poirot inspected each drawer and compartment, paying particular attention to the waste receptacle at one end. "Most interesting. And the previous contents of this waste bin, where were they discarded?" "In the main galley bin, sir." Poirot nodded, seemingly satisfied. He then asked to examine Carrington's personal effects once more. The steward brought them to our makeshift interview area, where Poirot focused his attention on the victim's briefcase. "The lock, Hastings. Observe the scratches around it. Someone has attempted to access this case since our last examination." I stared at the tiny marks that had indeed not been present earlier. But who could have? Who indeed? We have been preoccupied with our investigation. The passengers have had opportunity. A sudden patch of turbulence interrupted our conversation. The aircraft dropped sharply, then stabilized. Through the gap in the curtains, I glimpsed Elaine Carrington, clutching something in her hand. A torn photograph, which she hastily attempted to conceal in her handbag as the aircraft steadied. Poirot followed my gaze. "Ah, perhaps Madame Carrington wishes to dispose of certain memories. Retrieve it, if you please, Hastings, with discretion." I approached Mrs. Carrington, offering her a fresh cup of tea. As she accepted, I noticed the edge of the photograph protruding from her bag. When she excused herself to visit the lavatory moments later, I took the opportunity to extract it with as much subtlety as my naval training permitted. Back in our interview area, Poirot examined the torn image. It showed 3 men on what appeared to be a hunting expedition. Carrington, Maxwell Reed, and a third man whose face had been deliberately removed from the photograph. They stood against a snowy backdrop, holding rifles, their breath visible in the frigid air. An expedition to colder climates, Poirot observed, most suggestive. But who is the third man? That, mon ami, is a most excellent question. Poirot requested Professor Finch's presence once more. The archaeologist entered our curtained alcove with visible reluctance. Professor, in your extensive travels, you have no doubt encountered various hunting and survival techniques from different cultures. Finch adjusted his spectacles. Naturally, the study of ancient civilizations necessarily includes their methods of sustenance and warfare, including, perhaps, techniques from Arctic regions, Inuit methods, or Siberian, perhaps. A flicker of understanding crossed Finch's weathered face. You are referring to ice weapons. Yes, I am familiar with them, academically, of course. Ancient Arctic hunters would fashion knife blades and spear points from ice when other materials were unavailable. In the extreme cold, ice can become nearly as hard as steel. And these techniques, did they are documented, available to those with scholarly interest? Certainly, I have published on the subject myself. Survival technologies of indigenous Arctic cultures. Any university library would have it. His eyes narrowed. You can't seriously suggest I suggest nothing, Professor. I merely seek information. Poirot smiled genially. Tell me, how would such a weapon be stabilized? Ice alone would be difficult to grip, no? Finch hesitated, then continued reluctantly. Typically, a handle would be fashioned from available materials, wood, bone, leather wrappings. The blade would be temporarily affixed using water as an adhesive. In freezing temperatures, it forms an extremely effective bond. And at normal temperatures, the ice would begin to melt, would it not? Rapidly, minutes, perhaps, depending on ambient temperature. I see. Most illuminating. Poirot dismissed the professor with a nod. When Finch had gone, Poirot turned to me. We progress, Hastings. The pieces, they begin to form a pattern. Our conversation was interrupted by raised voices from the main cabin. Lady Westholme and Maxwell Reed were engaged in what appeared to be a heated exchange, their whispers carrying an intensity that drew all eyes toward them. I told you it was madness, Lady Westholme hissed, her aristocratic composure slipping. Reed gripped her wrist. Control yourself. This isn't the time or place. Poirot observed this interaction with keen interest. When the altercation subsided, he approached the drink cart once more, examining the contents of each glass and cup with methodical precision. Hastings, he murmured, when the steward served the pre-landing refreshments, observe carefully which passengers accept beverages and which do not. The afternoon sun hung low on the horizon now, casting long shadows through the cabin. Poirot stood by the window, gazing outward, his silhouette sharp against the golden light. In his hand he held the torn photograph, turning it over repeatedly, as if the answers to our questions might materialize from its glossy surface. I could almost see the workings of those famous little gray cells as he stood there, motionless, except for the slight rhythmic tapping of his forefinger against the photograph's edge. We had perhaps 2 hours remaining before landing, and I knew that within that time Poirot would unravel the seemingly impossible murder that had occurred in our midst, high above the Atlantic, where no one could have escaped, and no weapon had been found. Chapter 6. Interconnections. The setting sun bathed the cabin in amber light as Poirot arranged his notes in precise stacks on the small table. I had rarely seen him so meticulous, a sign of the complexity of the case that confronted us. He tapped a slender finger against Carrington's notebook, frowning at the cryptic entries. "Hastings," he said, "we must establish the true relationships between our fellow passengers. The surface connections, they reveal only part of the picture." He withdrew a sheet of paper and began drawing lines between names, creating a web of associations, Victor Carrington at the center, with spokes radiating outward to each suspect. "Let us consider what we know," he continued. "Mr. Reed and Mr. Carrington were business partners in a contentious merger. What was it called? The Wheeler merger, I supplied, consulting my notes. Precisely. And Lord Westholme had invested heavily in this venture, had he not? Yet moments ago we observed Lady Westholme engaged in a most intense discussion with Mr. Reed, not the behavior one would expect between mere social acquaintances. A steward approached with fresh coffee, which Poirot accepted with a nod of thanks. After the man departed, Poirot leaned closer. "Now, let us examine Dr. Winters. He claimed a professional grievance against Carrington, testifying in a lawsuit brought by factory workers, a matter of principle," he suggested. Poirot's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Yet I have discovered that shortly after this testimony, Dr. Winters's medical research funding was mysteriously withdrawn. The timing, it is suggestive, is it not? And Miss Leverson admitted to a past relationship with Carrington," I added. "Ah, but did she tell us the full extent of this relationship? I think not." Poirot gestured toward the cabin. "Observe her interactions with Mr. Wahiser Reed. They speak as people who share secrets, not as casual acquaintances." Outside our curtained alcove, the routine of the aircraft continued. Andrews and his team prepared for the final meal service before landing. Through the gap in the curtains, I watched Diana Leverson make her way toward the lavatory at the rear of the cabin. Her silk scarf had been removed, revealing a slender neck adorned with a silver chain, from which hung a small pendant. "That pendant," I murmured. "She has been concealing it beneath her scarf." "Indeed. Most interesting." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "When she returns, note which passengers she speaks with and their reactions." Our attention was diverted by a sharp exclamation from near the galley. Professor Finch stood with a newspaper in hand, gesturing animatedly to Dr. Winters. The doctor's face had drained of color as he examined whatever Finch was showing him. Poirot watched this exchange with keen interest. The professor appears to have made a discovery of his own, most fortuitous. The tension in the cabin had taken on an almost palpable quality. Mrs. Carrington remained isolated in her grief, real or feigned. I could not determine. Lord Westholme consulted his pocket watch with increasing frequency, his aristocratic composure beginning to fray around the edges. "Let us review what we have established," Poirot said, returning to his notes. Mr. Carrington was engaged in a business venture that involved several of our fellow passengers. This Operation Icarus he referenced in his notebook. A sudden patch of severe turbulence interrupted his analysis. The aircraft lurched violently, causing papers to scatter across our small table. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely, plunging us into the dim glow of the emergency lighting. Exclamations of alarm rose from the passengers. In the ghostly blue illumination, shadows transformed familiar faces into masks of anxiety and fear. For nearly 30 seconds, we remained suspended in this twilight state before the main lights hummed back to life. Poirot immediately gathered his scattered notes, checking each document with rapid precision. His expression darkened. "Something is missing, Hastings," he hissed. "The page from Carrington's notebook, the one with the initials. It has been taken." I scanned the floor, the seats, every visible surface. Are you certain it hasn't simply blown away in the confusion? Quite certain. This was no accident. Someone has used the opportunity to acquire evidence. Poirot's eyes narrowed. But who? A quick survey of the cabin revealed all passengers apparently in their assigned seats, their expressions ranging from mild concern to outright fear. Nothing in their demeanor suggested who might have slipped behind our curtain during those brief moments of darkness. "Hastings," Poirot whispered, "I require your assistance. When next the drink cart passes, observe carefully which passenger disposes of anything in the waste receptacle, and note who visits the lavatory in the next 15 minutes. The pre-landing meal service began shortly thereafter. Andrews wheeled the freshly stocked drink cart down the aisle, offering beverages and light refreshments. I positioned myself near the galley, affecting casual interest while maintaining a clear view of all passengers. Diana Levison declined both food and drink, her attention fixed on a small notebook very similar to the one we possess. Maxwell Reed accepted a whiskey, which he drank in a single swallow before requesting another. Professor Finch took tea, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he stirred in sugar. Most telling was Dr. Winter's reaction when offered coffee. He began to refuse, then paused, glancing toward Poirot before accepting. As Andrews moved on, the doctor stared into the cup without drinking, then abruptly rose and headed toward the lavatory, the untouched coffee abandoned on his tray table. I signaled discreetly to Poirot, who acknowledged with an almost imperceptible nod. When Dr. Winters emerged precisely 4 minutes later, his complexion appeared even paler than before. He returned to his seat and stared out the window, his reflection in the glass revealing a face etched with calculation. Poirot slipped from our alcove and made his way to the galley, where he conducted one final examination of the freezer compartment. Whatever he discovered there seemed to satisfy him, for he returned with the subtle smile that I had come to recognize as a sign that the final pieces of his puzzle were falling into place. "I believe I now understand the method, Hastings," he murmured, settling beside me. "A most ingenious approach combining elements of opportunity, scientific knowledge, and psychological misdirection. Few could have conceived it. Fewer still could have executed it successfully. Then you know who killed Carrington?" "I have a theory which fits the facts, but before I reveal it, there is one final experiment to conduct." He withdrew his handkerchief, with its carefully marked water samples, and examined them under his pocket magnifying glass. "As I suspected, the differential rate of evaporation confirms my hypothesis." The captain's voice came over the speaker system, announcing our final approach to New York. The skyline appeared on the horizon, a jagged silhouette against the deepening twilight. We would soon be on the ground where police would take control of the investigation. Yet, as we began our descent, I sensed that the most dangerous part of our journey still lay ahead, for among the 8 passengers in our cabin, one had demonstrated both the ingenuity to create an impossible murder and the ruthlessness to execute it, and that individual now faced exposure at the hands of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 7. Descent into Darkness. The Stratoliner tilted forward as we began our final approach to New York. Through the window, the city's lights glimmered like scattered jewels against the darkening sky. Under ordinary circumstances, the view would have been breathtaking. Now, it merely signaled that our time was running short. Poirot had emerged from behind our curtained alcove with a curious air of calm resolve. His bow tie sat perfectly straight, his mustache impeccably groomed. Only the intensity of his gaze betrayed the gravity of the moment. "Captain," he addressed the aircraft's commander, who had joined us in the cabin, "I should like to gather all the passengers together before we land. There are matters which must be addressed while we remain in flight." The captain nodded. "Of course, Mr. Poirot. We have approximately 20 minutes before touchdown. That will suffice." The passengers were directed to move to the forward section of the cabin. They complied with varying degrees of reluctance, some gathering their personal belongings as though preparing for immediate departure. Professor Finch tucked his precious notes into his leather satchel. Diana Levison adjusted her scarf once more around her neck, the pendant now carefully concealed beneath the silk. Elaine Carrington took her place beside Lady Westholm, her copper hair catching the cabin lights as she tilted her chin upward in a gesture of defiance. Dr. Winters positioned himself slightly apart from the others, his thin fingers rhythmically tapping against his medical bag. Maxwell Reed was the last to join the gathering. His complexion had taken on an ashen quality, beads of perspiration visible on his forehead despite the cabin's controlled temperature. He claimed a seat at the rear of the group, his eyes darting between Poirot and the cabin door as though calculating distances. The aircraft encountered minor turbulence, causing a momentary distraction. I observed Dr. Winters lean toward Professor Finch, whispering something that caused the archaeologist to stiffen visibly. Before Poirot could begin his address, Winters rose to his feet. "I believe I know what happened here," he announced, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled tension. "And I know who is responsible." Poirot raised an eyebrow but remained silent, allowing the doctor to continue. It was Reed. Winters pointed an accusatory finger. "Maxwell Reed killed Carrington. I saw him with a peculiar object just before the turbulence hit, something long and cylindrical that he quickly concealed in his jacket." Reed surged to his feet, his face contorting with anger. "That's absurd. I was in my seat the entire time. Everyone saw me." "Not the entire time," Winters countered. "You moved during the worst of the turbulence, I noticed, because I was concerned about my medical supplies shifting in the overhead compartment." "This is outrageous." Reed's voice rose sharply. If anyone had motive, it was Carrington's wife. The man was worth millions, and their marriage was hardly blissful. All eyes turned to Elaine Carrington, who remained remarkably composed under this sudden scrutiny. "How dare you?" she said quietly. "Victor and I may have had our differences, but I had no reason to wish him dead." "No," Reed laughed bitterly. "What about your relationship with Professor Finch? Did you think no one noticed the glances you exchanged when Victor's attention was elsewhere?" The professor removed his spectacles, polishing them with deliberate care. "You overstepped, sir. Mrs. Carrington consulted me regarding artifacts her husband acquired during his travels, nothing more." The allegations continued to fly across the cabin. Diana Levison was accused of harboring a decades-old grudge over a romantic rejection. Lord Westholm allegedly faced financial ruin if Carrington withdrew from their joint venture. Each accusation was met with vehement denial, each denial followed by a counter-accusation. Through it all, Poirot observed silently, his head tilted slightly to one side. I recognized this posture. He was allowing the suspects to themselves through their emotional reactions, noting which accusations prompted the most vigorous responses. Dr. Winters remained standing, his medical authority lending weight to his accusations against Reed. The wound was consistent with a thin, rigid implement. Reed has experience with hunting weapons. The connection is obvious. If we're discussing hunting experience, Reed countered, let's not forget our distinguished archaeologist. Professor Finch has extensive knowledge of primitive weapons, including those used in Arctic conditions. His funding was cut by Carrington just last month. The professor removed his glasses entirely, his weathered face flushing. My research funding is hardly motive for murder. Besides, I was working throughout the flight. Everyone saw me. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot finally interjected, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. This display of accusation is most illuminating, but perhaps we should examine facts rather than speculations. He turned to the captain. I assume you have contacted the authorities regarding our situation. The captain nodded. Police will be waiting at the gate. They've requested that all passengers remain seated upon landing. Excellent. Then perhaps we should... A sudden, violent tremor shook the aircraft, sending Poirot against the bulkhead. The cabin lights flickered ominously. Gasps and cries of alarm filled the air as oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments. Just air turbulence, the captain assured everyone. His professional calm is stark contrast to the mounting tension. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts for landing. As the passengers complied, I noticed an exchange between Professor Finch and Dr. Winters, a brief, meaningful glance that spoke of shared knowledge. Diana Leverson clutched her pendant through her scarf, her knuckles whitening with the force of her grip. Maxwell Reed wiped perspiration from his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief, which he then carefully returned to his breast pocket. Poirot beckoned me closer as he reclaimed his own seat. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "In moments of crisis, people reveal their true concerns. Note how Reed preserves that handkerchief, despite his agitation. Most significant." Through the window, the lights of the approaching airport grew larger, the landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan that reverberated through the cabin. Poirot remained perfectly still, his eyes half closed in concentration. I knew this expression well. He was reviewing every detail, every connection, ensuring his solution was flawless before revealing it. The aircraft continued its descent, the engines changing pitch as we approached the runway. In these final moments before touchdown, the cabin had fallen into an unnatural silence. Each passenger seemed lost in private thoughts or private fears. Mrs. Carrington stared straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Lord and Lady Westholme exchanged whispers behind cupped hands. Professor Finch had removed a small notebook from his jacket pocket, reviewing its contents with fierce concentration. And Maxwell Reed, the man accused by Dr. Winters, sat rigid in his seat, his gaze fixed on some middle distance, his fingers still clutching the handkerchief that had drawn Poirot's attention. The runway lights appeared below us, a string of pearls guiding our approach through the gathering darkness. In mere minutes, we would be on the ground where police would take statements, and evidence would be collected by proper authorities. Yet I sensed Poirot had no intention of relinquishing his solution to local law enforcement without first revealing it in his own inimitable fashion. The wheels touched down with a squeal of rubber against tarmac, the aircraft shuddering as it decelerated. We had arrived safely in New York. All of us except Victor Carrington, whose body lay cold in the cargo hold, his killer still among us, still unknown to all. Chapter 8. The Frozen Truth. The Stratoliner had come to a complete stop at the gate, yet the captain announced that at Poirot's request no one would disembark until further notice. Through the windows, police vehicles were visible on the tarmac, their red lights pulsing in the evening darkness. Poirot stood at the front of the cabin, his diminutive figure commanding the attention of everyone present. The passengers had been instructed to return to their original seats, a tableau frozen in time recreating the scene before Carrington's murder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his accent more pronounced than usual, a sign I recognized as indicating his immense satisfaction with the solution he was about to unveil. "We have traveled together through the sky on a journey marked by tragedy. A man has been killed in a most ingenious manner, a manner designed to confound investigation." Andrews and the other stewards stood at the rear of the cabin. 2 police officers had been permitted to board, but remained by the exit at Poirot's request. The murder of Victor Carrington presented a seemingly impossible problem, Poirot continued. A man stabbed to death in a confined space under the observation of his fellow passengers, with no weapon found. C'est impossible, n'est-ce pas? And yet it happened. Mrs. Carrington sat rigidly in her seat, her fingers toying with her emerald ring. Professor Finch appeared to be studying Poirot with academic interest. Dr. Winters maintained his professional composure, though his fingers drummed an irregular rhythm against his knee. "Let us first consider the false solutions," Poirot continued. "One might suggest that Mrs. Carrington killed her husband for his fortune. Yet she was observed throughout the turbulence, her eyes closed in distress. Lady Westholme might have desired to protect her family's investments, but she too remained clearly visible in her seat." He paced slowly down the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back. Professor Finch had academic grievances, but his elaborate papers would surely have been disturbed had he left his seat. Diana Leverson harbored old resentments, yet her movements to and from the lavatory were noted by the cabin staff. Miss Leverson's hand moved unconsciously to her scarf, confirming her awareness of being observed. Dr. Winters, as a medical professional, would understand human anatomy, the precise location to strike for immediate effect. And yet what weapon could he have employed? Where could he have concealed it? The same questions apply to Lord Westholme. Poirot paused beside Maxwell Reed's seat. Reed's face had taken on an almost grayish pallor, the collar of his shirt dark with perspiration, despite the cabin's cool temperature. And then we have Mr. Reed, business partner, rival, and the man with perhaps the strongest motive. The Wheeler merger was failing. Mr. Carrington planned to withdraw, leaving Reed to face financial ruin and potential criminal charges. Reed's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests, but the central question remains. The weapon. Where is the instrument that caused the narrow, deep wound in Mr. Carrington's chest? The stewards searched the aircraft. Nothing was found. Nothing could be found, because the weapon itself, Poirot paused dramatically, no longer exists. A murmur passed through the cabin. The weapon, Poirot declared, was made of ice. The silence that followed was absolute. A dagger of ice, fashioned in the galley freezer before the flight, perfectly designed for its purpose, rigid enough to penetrate clothing and flesh, narrow enough to create a minimal wound, and with the remarkable property of destroying itself. After serving its purpose, it simply melted away, leaving only the inexplicable wound. I watched the faces of our fellow passengers. Most registered shock or disbelief. Only Maxwell Reed remained utterly still, his eyes fixed on Poirot with a gaze of terrible intensity. But ice alone would not suffice, Poirot continued. One cannot easily grip a shaft of ice. A handle would be required, something to provide stability and force, something that could be easily disposed of afterward. He turned to Andrews. "The drink cart, if you please." The steward wheeled the cart forward. Poirot opened its waste receptacle, extracting a small paper bag. Within this bag is a scrap of cloth recovered from the galley waste bin, a cloth with traces of blood, Mr. Carrington's blood, and fibers from a monogrammed handkerchief. All eyes turned to Maxwell Reed, whose own monogrammed handkerchief was visible in his breast pocket. The method was simple, yet brilliant, Poirot explained. During preparations for the flight, Mr. Reed fashioned a dagger from ice in the galley freezer. He stabilized it with a wooden handle, perhaps a stirrer or similar item, wrapped in cloth for better grip. The cloth came from a handkerchief identical to the one he carries now. Reed remained silent, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. When the turbulence began, attention was diverted. The drink cart, not properly secured, rolled slightly. Mr. Reed seized this moment to retrieve his weapon from wherever he had concealed it, perhaps in the lavatory or within his own belongings. A swift, precise strike to Mr. Carrington's heart during the most violent moments of turbulence. The victim made no sound. The deed was done. Poirot's voice softened. The ice dagger was left embedded, beginning its inevitable dissolution. The wooden handle, wrapped in the telltale cloth, was quickly disposed of in a used coffee cup on the drink cart. By the time the body was discovered, the ice had melted completely, leaving only the wound. He turned to face Reed directly. "But you made one error, monsieur. The cloth retained traces of blood, microscopic but present, and when I examined the waste receptacle, I found fibers that matched your monogrammed handkerchief, the very item you so carefully preserved, even during moments of extreme distress." Reed's composure finally broke. "You can prove nothing," he hissed. "A few fibers, circumstantial at best." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded deep. "But there is more. Operation Icarus, the project referenced in Mr. Carrington's notebook. Not a business venture at all, but a code name for his investigation into your embezzlement from the company. He discovered your schemes, your falsified accounts. He planned to expose you upon reaching New York." "You're guessing," Reed challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. "Non, monsieur. The torn photograph, the hunting expedition in Arctic conditions. You learned survival techniques, including the creation of ice weapons. The third man in the photograph, the face so carefully removed, was the guide who taught you these skills. Professor Finch recognized him from academic journals, an expert in indigenous Arctic hunting methods." Reed's shoulders slumped, the fight visibly draining from him. "Furthermore," Poirot continued, addressing the entire cabin, "Mr. Reed's monogrammed handkerchief, so unique, made from a distinctive Egyptian cotton with a particular weave, the fibers found in the waste receptacle will match precisely. The evidence, though small, is conclusive." 2 police officers moved forward at the captain's signal. Reed offered no resistance as they took position on either side of his seat. "Victor was going to ruin me," Reed said, his voice barely audible. 30 years building our company, and he would throw it all away because of a few accounting irregularities. He didn't understand what was at stake. Poirot's expression remained impassive. "Murder is never an irregularity, monsieur." As the officers escorted Reed from the aircraft, the remaining passengers sat in stunned silence. The perfect crime, almost perfect, had been solved. The weapon that vanished, the murder in plain sight, the sealed environment that should have made escape impossible, all unraveled by Poirot's little gray cells. Outside the window, the lights of New York sparkled against the night sky. We had traveled thousands of miles across the Atlantic only to discover that the darkest journey had been the one taken by a desperate man's soul, a man who, like Icarus, had flown too close to the sun and now faced the inevitable fall. I hope you enjoyed our journey through murder at 40,000 feet. If you enjoyed the mystery, consider subscribing to Baker Street Riddles. Until next time, keep an eye on the little details, trust your gray cells, and never underestimate the cunning of a criminal, or the brilliance of the one who catches them. Signing off from Baker Street Riddles.